57 degrees Fahrenheit in a light to moderate northerly wind. That's it from us for the moment. We're back with more regional news for you just after 11 o'clock. In the meantime, have a good morning.
Hello and welcome to Breakfast News Extra. It's 9 o'clock. Today we're going to be talking about a home wrecker which can be very hard to keep out. Once it takes hold, there may be no getting rid of it. The problem is subsidence. It affects 50,000 households in the country, and recently insurance claims have gone through the roof. In a moment we'll be joined by two specialists to help us answer your questions with advice on how to keep out the cracks. First though, let's have a summary of the main news stories from Hugh.
Morning. Jack Straw will outline his plans to reform the youth justice system.
For thousands of households, subsidence causes untold misery. It begins harmlessly enough, just a few minor cracks. But if it's not recognised, these can soon develop into gaping holes which need expert attention. And this costs, as shown by the figures which are about to be published by the Association of British Insurers. They say the value of claims this year has risen by 22% compared to the same time last year. In a moment we're going to be taking your calls to our two subsidence experts with me here, but first one of our viewers who's experienced recurring subsidence. She begins by describing what her dream home looked like before the problem started.
Well, it really looked like a cottage in the country because there were very, very high 8 to 10 feet hedges all the way around and enormous trees which reached right up in the sky, high over the roofs of the houses, and were a complete landmark and were admired by everybody. And we felt completely isolated in a little country cottage, and we loved it. I noticed a rather bad crack in the wallpaper and just thought it was a question of redecorating and didn't think much about it. But then I saw high on the ceiling and the wall there was more cracks. And on further investigation, and as the days went by, there were more cracks. And in fact, in the next room, which is a bedroom, there were more cracks there, even worse. And it got so that we were really snooping around the house, finding what was happening.
I'm a consulting engineer and was called in by Mr. and Mrs. Bergman to visit the property and comment on the cracking that had occurred, and to try to establish whether the cracking was symptomatic of a subsidence problem.
When the work was completed, we were very, very satisfied and thought we would settle down to a normal life. But to our amazement and horror, we found in the bedroom more cracks under the window, which continued outwards again to the very same spot where it had the trouble before. So of course, the insurance company was brought in again, and we found that the damage was possibly worse on the exterior than it had been before. The interior is not quite so bad, but the exterior is really very bad, and it's going to be a very difficult time for us, I think.
It is not too unusual for problems to come back, particularly nowadays, because records have shown that over the last 2 years it's been a dry spell for some 230 years. And it's really the dry conditions that help bring on the problems of subsidence. The damage that we've now got to Mrs. Bergman's property is such that we're going to have to underpin, which is putting bits of concrete underneath the foundation.
With me is Brett-Pitt, a subsidence claims specialist, and Jonathon Hazell, a tree expert. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Ian, first of all, why is the value of claims going up? Is the problem getting worse?
Well, unfortunately, it's because we're in the midst of a very dry spell. The weather experts tell us that we're effectively in the middle of a dry spell for the last 200 years, as was pointed out in the previous...
So it is all about the drought?
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, properties located in areas of clay soil are prone to subsidence damage because the clay can shrink. And that's realistically where the problem lies. So properties perhaps in the Midlands and the south of the country are going to be more prone to this problem than perhaps other parts of the country.
So areas like the northeast Scotland should be okay?
Yes, the characteristics of the soil structures up there are different anyway. They're not on predominantly clay soils, and of course they have a much higher rainfall than other parts of the country.
If a crack appears at home, Ian, should people be worried? Does it automatically mean that something's going wrong underneath?
Okay, well, first of all, people must realise comparatively few properties actually suffer from subsidence. If you added together all the properties that have suffered from this problem since the drought of 1995, it will be less than 0.5% of the total number of properties in this country. Also, you must remember all properties do actually suffer from cracking. Houses generally move and can cause hairline cracks. That's nothing to worry about, and realistically it can be repaired through routine redecoration. Unfortunately, the properties that do suffer from subsidence, you'll actually notice diagonal cracking around doors and windows, or perhaps at the junction of an extension or a porch where you'll have a tapering crack that's perhaps wider than a 10p piece. That's perhaps when you ought to call in an expert to diagnose perhaps whether you've got a problem.
Jonathan, what part do trees play in all of this?
About 75% of the cases of subsidence have a vegetation or a tree element. The trees will take moisture from the soil. When the soil dries and shrinks during the summer, it may not have the opportunity to re-wet over winter. As Ian has said, we've experienced very dry spells this last few months. The rainfall simply hasn't been, until very recently, to re-wet the soil, to allow the soil to re-expand. Trees are implicated in some 75%, as I say, of claims.
Should we just chop them down then? Will we be all right?
Chopping down is likely to be an imprecise solution. I would much rather people sought specific specialist advice on site to try and diagnose exactly what has caused the subsidence. It might be a leaking drain, for example, has led to the cracking. Nothing to do with the tree at all. To then go along and remove the tree may or may not lead to further problems, but certainly would damage the environment and the amenity attraction of the area.
Right, well, let's go straight away. We'll come back to you in a moment, Ian. Let's go immediately to our calls. Our first caller is Catherine Phillips on the line from Liverpool. Good morning to you, Catherine.
Good morning, Liz.
What would you like to ask?
Well, what it is, the property next door to mine is in an advanced state of subsidence. And over the last 6 to 8 months, I've noticed a lot of cracks appearing throughout my property. I was just wondering, really, is next door causing my damage?
Ian, why don't you take that?
First of all, Catherine, can I ask, have you actually made an insurance claim, or are you insured?
Yes, we are insured, and we have actually put an insurance claim through.
Okay, and have they appointed experts to deal with your particular problem?
They are actually monitoring it at the moment, but they are having difficulty contacting the insurers of the next door property.
Right. Well, in reality, it's highly unlikely that the principal cause of the damage to your property is the neighbouring property moving. It could well be a contributory factor, but it's unlikely to be the sole factor. It's more likely to be, as Jonathan's mentioned, the effects of a tree or a leaking drain underground, which is affecting both yours and your neighbour's property. Now, there is a definite need for the two insurers to get together and to discuss information and pass on relevant engineering advice so that the problem can be resolved as soon as possible. It's absolutely critical in subsidence cases to deal and find the cause and eradicate the cause of the problem as soon as possible.
What sort of time frame have people got?
Well, if the cause can be identified and detected at the earliest possible stage, it can be eradicated within a few weeks. For instance, if it is a tree or a leaking drain, the tree can be dealt with or the drain repaired. A property usually has to be monitored for a period of time just so that everyone's happy that the problem has been dealt with, and then usually relatively straightforward repairs can be undertaken, and that's the problem dealt with.
Well, Jan Singh is on the line now from London. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
What would you like to ask?
Yes, my property started subsiding some years ago, and it was underpinned by engineers after monitoring. And since 2 years, the cracks have started coming up again. And my engineer now thinks that maybe because of bad weather, warm weather, the cracks have come up and needs refilled. Or is this so, or what is the reason?
Jonathan.
It sounds rather like the story that we saw at the start of the programme. The lady there had the property investigated. I wonder, perhaps, it's very difficult for me to give general advice over the phone, Mr. Singh, but it might be that, I hesitate to say it, but perhaps the correct diagnosis was not made when the underpinning was first recommended. I understood that you to say that your specialist is back with you to consider a further exploration. Is that correct?
That's true.
Yeah. So hopefully your specialist, your experts, will be able to not necessarily reconsider, but perhaps examine the evidence again and come up with what I would hope for in your case is a more realistic diagnosis of the problem you're actually suffering.
What other factors could be involved then if it's not subsidence? I mean, there's something called heave, isn't there, which can be a problem?
Heave can be, but it's a much overplayed bogey, I'm afraid. Heave is the reverse of subsidence. Heave is the situation where a very dry soil has been is re-wetting, and a dry soil will shrink, and so foundations will move and the property will fall. A soil which is subject to heave will expand, re-wet, and push the property out of the ground. I'm not sure that there are many cases.
I would agree with Jonathan. Heave is usually only found on new properties where perhaps a wood has been felled, for instance, and the house built in that area, and the ground has been naturally dry because of the moisture extraction taken out by the trees. The wood is then subsequently felled, a house built, and sometimes the foundations aren't quite designed to meet what's actually happening.
Another wonderful anecdote on that line is it's not necessarily trees that are the problem. I've heard of a property that was built on the site of an old brickworks, and the brick kiln was working for something like 150 years. The soil beneath the house that was built on the works was so dry that when it began to re-wet, pop, house came out of the ground. Nothing to do with the tree.
How spooky. On the line now from Leeds is Jordan Powell. Good morning to you, Jordan. What would you like to ask?
Oh, good morning, Liz. I'm interested to know the legal position with regard to a neighbour's large tree, which is about 12 foot away from my house. If the roots are spread as far as the branches, they'll now be well under my property. Can I ask them to remove this tree?
Jonathan, trees, that's your area.
Right. So under common law, you are entitled to remove vegetation, be it overground or underground, which crosses your property boundary. You're quite at liberty to remove branches. You're also, I think, at liberty to remove roots. But I would advise a note of caution. If during the course of removal of branches or roots you cause damage to your neighbour's property, I'm sure the situation isn't quite so clear, and you may then find your neighbour taking you to task for damaging his or her property in turn. I don't know if Ian, you have any?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. What people must remember is that people who own a tree have a duty, a common law duty, to actually maintain that tree and to avoid it causing damage to neighbouring property. Now the difficulty is most people who own trees and own property don't understand that trees could actually contribute towards subsidence problems. So if someone suspects there is a tree in a neighbour's property or a neighbour's garden, or indeed in a pavement belonging to a local authority, then perhaps they might want to consult a tree specialist, such as someone from Jonathan's organisation, and actually take advice to see whether that tree could actually cause a subsidence problem.
But from what you were saying earlier, Jonathan, no indiscriminate chopping of trees.
No, that would be injudicious and unwise.
All right, well, let's talk now to MacKean Shepherd, who joins us from Oxford. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I'm quite worried. My insurance company is taking quite a while to pay up on my claim. I know my house is subsiding, yet they say it will take up to 2 years to monitor the problem. Why is this?
Ian.
Okay. I think 2 years perhaps is a little, although I don't know the specific circumstances of your particular claim, 2 years is perhaps a little bit too long to be monitoring a property. It could be that there are circumstances there which have made it more difficult, but realistically, usually monitoring over perhaps 12 to 18 months just to make sure that things have settled down is a good period, and to determine that there is going to be no further subsidence problems. And if things have stabilised, then realistically building repairs can be undertaken as soon as possible. Perhaps 2 years. My advice to you there, adding to that, is if you feel a little bit hard done by and it is taking a bit too long, then perhaps speak to your insurance company and ask them to perhaps review your case, or ask for a second opinion, ask your insurance company to obtain a second opinion.
Well, we've just got time to speak to Martin Jackson, who is on the line from Hawkhurst. Martin, in Kent. Good morning to you.
Good morning, yes. I've lived 30 years here in Kent in a high-risk subsidence area. Although I've long paid off my mortgage, I've kept my house insurance with my original mortgage lender. But although I'm always inundated by attractive offers from other house insurers, including, I must say, Direct Line, after they know my postcode, they seem to run away. I just wonder how other people in areas like mine insure their property and what effect that reluctant insurers have on house prices.
First of all, I'm a little surprised if Direct Line have actually refused to insure you, unless there's a specific reason which we don't know about. As far as I'm concerned, as far as Direct Line's concerned, no property is uninsurable. There are specific circumstances we have to take into account, obviously. Realistically, a property in a clay soil does carry a higher risk, as we discussed earlier, than perhaps properties in other parts of the country.
That's some insurance companies, though, isn't it?
I can't speak for others, but certainly from Direct Line's point of view, we are prepared to insure a property anywhere in the country. Rates obviously change, and our rating structures for insurance depend on the differing areas of the country and based on the differing soil types. But realistically, perhaps we could speak again, but there is no reason why certainly Direct Line would have refused you insurance.
Well, I hope that will have been reassuring, but for both of you, Jonathan, Andy, and thank you very much indeed for all your help and advice this morning.
Thank you.
Now, do please keep those calls coming in. They make all the difference to the programme. And here's a reminder of our numbers. Phone us on 0181 811 1000, 0181 811 1000, or send a fax 0181 811 1010. 0181 811 1010. Those lines are open. You can email us on breakfast.news.extra@bbc.co.uk, and you can write to us at Breakfast News Extra, PO Box 9988, London W12 6BN. That's it. We're back tomorrow. Until then, have a good day. Bye-bye.